Okay, so it's just to cover Windows Azure a little bit. That is our Microsoft's cloud platform. And as far as cloud computing goes, we look at it from three different perspectives. One is infrastructure as a service, which is what, it's the first one that came out when cloud computing first started. And that's where we provide you with an infrastructure all the way up to the virtualization layer. And then from the operating system onwards, you're the one that take care of it. It's pretty good because it gives you full access to a virtual machine, and you're the one that control what runs on it. But at the same time, it gives you that responsibility to still have to take care of the virtual machine itself and the operating system and any server components or tools that you run on top of it. But it still has some of the cloud computing benefits like pay as you go, scaling, and you don't have to worry about the actual physical machines that will be running your solution or your virtual machines. Now, on the platform as a service perspective, we provide you with a higher level of management from Microsoft side, where we take care of the operating system and some of the middleware layer for you. So, for example, if you use Windows Azure Cloud services, you pretty much deploy a website or deploy a solution that will be running in the background, and we take care of making sure that solution is always up and running. We patch the operating system, and we patch the .NET layer that is behind all that. Not to mention a few other services that we provide as a platform. For example, a caching service, identity services with Windows Azure Active Directory and access control, storage, so storage as a service, and Windows Azure SQL database, which is also a database as a service. And then finally, on the software as a service perspective, Microsoft provides that as part of, say, CRM Online or Office 365, or even Hotmail.com could be considered one. So usually software as a service is what you would build on top of either a platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. And Microsoft has a hand across all three. So on the infrastructure as a service perspective, we provide virtual machines and virtual networking. Platform as a service is all those services that I mentioned as well. So you can take advantage of those services and run your solutions. Some of the benefits that you get from Windows Azure, the first thing would be it accelerates both your development and your production time, giving you faster release to market. Most of the organizations nowadays, it still takes a while to actually provision the hardware or provision virtual machines for you to take advantage of. Or even if you're running stuff on your dev box, it gets cumbersome after a while when you have to manage a lot of virtual machines doing different things. So with Windows Azure, you log into the Windows Azure portal, you say, I want to create a new virtual machine, or I want to create a new Windows Azure SQL database. And within, for a SQL database, it's seconds, and for a virtual machine, in 5 minutes, you get your virtual machine up and running with the operating system that you chose. So if you haven't seen the Windows Azure Management Portal, it's under manage.windowsazure.com. And it logs in. You can choose if you use the live ID that you use to create your subscription. Usually, if you have an MSDN subscription, it will be the same live ID that is associated with your MSDN subscription, and that gets you access to the sexy Windows Azure portal. It's all HTML5, so you can even use your Windows RT based tablet to manage it, and other tablets out there, or even your phone. Sometimes I've used my phone to log in and scale things. So once you log in here, on the left you have all the services that I mentioned, or a few of the services, and you can just go and create a new service. So for example here, Azure Compute Virtual Machine. if I choose from gallery, for example, just to give us a list of all the images that we provide to you, you can see that there's a tick box here for MSDN. So I have that unticked, so it's only going to list the images that are available for everyone. It includes a bunch of Windows ones, SQL Server, SharePoint, BizTalk, some Visual Studio ones as well, and some of the Oracle from the Oracle partnership that we announced a little while ago. Some of these are previews, some of them are in production, so you just have to look into it before you start using it, but for you to play around, and even a few Linux instances as well. So if I tick the MSDN tick box here, it gives me the ones that are only available for people that have an MSDN subscription, and these are the Visual Studio ones. So for example, if you don't have Visual Studio 2013 yet and you want to just check it out and play around with it, you could come into Azure, say I want to create a new VM, and choose the one that already has Visual Studio pre-installed, one of these three. That would give you a VM running in the cloud that you can remote into and just test Visual Studio and see, and start developing there before you install Visual Studio in your dev box. So this is how to create a new VM. Is pretty straightforward. You can see there's 4 steps here, so you would have to come in and just choose a few things like the VM name, the size that you want, username and password, and then a few things around load balancing as well, and etc. I'll go back to my presentation. Open and flexible, as you saw there, I guess part of it is we don't want this to be just this to run just Microsoft workload. So we have a few different types of Linux and Unix-based VMs, as well as Windows ones. And also when you deploy to Windows Azure websites, one of the platform as a service solutions that we have, we will run not only .NET but also PHP and Ruby and a few others. So definitely there's flexibility there as to what you can run on Windows Azure. Then finally, economics. I think we're one of the only cloud providers that actually have it on per minute billing. And if you look at the actual bill that you receive, it has up down to the millisecond. So you will only pay for what you use. If you have a VM running for 10 minutes and then you shut it down and leave it shut down, then you are only going to be charged for those 10 minutes, which is pretty interesting. You can start looking at some of the workloads that you have, or even if you're doing using Azure just to run some of the dev and test scenarios that you are creating. So your production environment is still on premises, but you want to test it out first. You can go into Windows Azure, create all the VMs and create the environment there, create a copy of your database, test everything, and once you're done with that environment, you just shut down the virtual machines and then you stop being charged for that. So that's where the economics come. And also, of course, when we build our data centers, we buy hundreds of thousands of virtual machines and hardware, so that we get quite a massive discount, and we can also pass on some of that discount to you, which means that usually you will have cheaper pricing with Windows Azure than you would with a normal hoster. So just to cover, we have quite a few different services, and you can look at a combination of all these as you're building your solution. So you could have, if you really need to tune and maintain the database, you could have SQL Server installed on a virtual machine. And then you can have blob storage to host a whole lot of PDF files or documents that you're using, and then deploy your website onto Windows Azure websites with a bit of caching involved. So you pick and choose from all of these services here based on what your solution requires, and then you take advantage of them. They're all under your own Windows Azure subscription. You just have to then go into each one of the services and start using them in combination to create a solution. So if you are using Visual Studio, and hopefully you are, this shows you a couple of new things that we have built into Visual Studio, and you get them once you install the Visual Studio SDK, the Windows Azure SDK for Visual Studio. So if you go into windowsazure.com and then choose downloads from windowsazure.com, and from the portal it takes you to the same place. You see that .NET is chosen there, and then it has the SDK link. So if you use Visual Studio 2013, there's the link, and this is 2012. Once you have that installed, it's going to add the server section to Windows Azure on the Server Explorer, which is pretty good. Let me just start to zoom it so I can zoom in there. Hopefully you can see here. So under Windows Azure, I've expanded a whole bunch of different things that I have. So cloud services, I don't have anything, but have one mobile service, some SQL databases, some storage accounts, etc. And I also have a couple of virtual machines. You can see that one is stopped and the other one is running. One thing that you can do from here, you can see all the endpoints that I have enabled, including remote power on desktop, a PowerShell for you to do remote PowerShell execution, and finally I created myself a new port for HTTP, and if I want, I can right click on that from Visual Studio and say connect using remote desktop, and that pretty much gives me the RDP file that I can use to remote into the machine. For the admin password, and then from there it should connect me all the way through to that VM running in, I think, West US. And here it's a pretty regular Windows Server 2008 R2. So from here you can do basically anything that you want to do with your virtual machine. I enabled port 80 because it just enabled IIS on that VM. So if I go into if you look here on the right, it gives me the DNS name for that VM. So I can choose that, copy it, go to a browser and paste that in. And that should just give, I don't have any website running, but it gives me the IIS. So it just to prove that it's actually running IIS on the box with port 80 open so that I can actually get to it. So that's pretty neat from Visual Studio being able to see, and you could see, let me just show you again, from the VM here I can delete the VM, shut it down, restart. So there's a few different things that you can do. If it's stopped like that one, raise crew, I can start it as well. Cool. So that's what you can do. You can also filter the subscriptions that you have. So if you have, for example, your own MSDN subscription, but you also have been added to the enterprise agreement, a list of subscriptions that your company have, or something like that, or you created a trial account just to play around, you can filter and manage the subscriptions from here just to choose what you see from Visual Studio. Maybe from Visual Studio you just want to show your development subscription, which might be a good idea. So you could filter it out through there. Shown. And one thing to keep in mind is, and it's a workload that we see a lot of companies using, is just to use Windows Azure for dev and test. Like I mentioned before, it gives you this sandbox environment for you to deploy and test solutions. As long as the solutions that you have will run on the server operating systems that we support, which are pretty much Windows Server 2008 R2 onwards from a Windows perspective, and then there's some Oracle and other Linux distributions. You can use Windows Azure for it. You can use it for load testing as well and stress testing. Deploying SharePoint is a pretty big one, or a SQL Server as well. And another thing you can also that we've seen being done, and I think that there's quite a few teams at Microsoft as well that run, is to install TFS on virtual machines on Windows Azure and run it from there. Of course, there's quite a lot of teams now that are using Visual Studio Online for what TFS does on premises. So Visual Studio Online is another one that you might want to look at for team collaboration and also source code and build and load testing as well. And all of that runs on top of Windows Azure anyway. Like I said, you can start, stop, and another thing that you can do, I forgot to mention, is that you can, because Windows Azure in the background, it's running Hyper-V, and it understands the VHD format, which is an open standard anyway. You could get a VHD that you have on premises for a virtual machine and upload it into Windows Azure Blob Storage. Then from there, on the Windows Azure side, create a new virtual machine based on that VHD, and vice versa as well. You could start on Windows Azure, and then once you're happy, you can shut it down, download that VHD file from your blob storage, and start running it from on premises. You just have to keep in mind that while Windows Azure provides you with a license for Windows, once you're running it on premises, you have to have a way to be covered by that license for the operating system itself. And then finally, I just wanted to cover the web, and there's I can think of 4 different places in Windows Azure where you can run a website. So at the very basic, like I showed you there, you have a virtual machine running, you start running IIS or other web server on it, and you should think of it as your first house. So you pretty much manage everything, the operating system, the applications that run on it, and etc. Then you go to Windows Azure Cloud Services, where you have web roles and worker roles, and that is where Windows Azure starts to manage the operating system for you, but still gives you a few more features for you to control. So you can run startup scripts that will basically, where you can choose to change anything on the VM as well. So it's still a virtual machine, but it's non-persistent like virtual machines. So Windows Azure Cloud Services is a non-persistent solution where you provide us with a package with the code for your website, and we'll run it for you. But it still gives you access to remote desktop into the VMs and see what's running there, or provide startup scripts to make sure that any changes that you need on the VM will get applied. And you can think of that as if you're renting a house or renting a room somewhere, where you still have some responsibilities, but you're not responsible for the whole thing. Then finally, Windows Azure Websites, it's where Microsoft will run everything for you, including IIS and etc. So you just right-click Web Deploy into a Windows Azure website, or you can use some sort of online repository like TFS Online, and you can deploy into that, and then it'll notice that there's a change to the code, and then kick off a new build and deploy to Windows Azure websites. And you can think of that as a hotel, for example. So everything is managed and run for you. You just worry about running your code. And I guess the fourth thing that's not there, but it's very basic, is if all you have are static pages and static images, then you could deploy that to just blob storage as a static solution, and that would be that would be another way to run some static content. But if you have a website built on ASP.NET, you can choose any one of these 3. But I probably recommend trying to get it to run on Windows Azure websites, because your operational costs will be much lower, and we have worried about making sure that everything that runs on Azure websites is running at with the best tuning that we could do for IIS running on top of Windows Server. So that's something to look at for websites. And then finally, if your company have MSTN subscriptions and you don't have one assigned to your name, you should have a chat with your manager and get an MSTN subscription given to you. Once you have that subscription assigned to you, then you can go into the benefits, and one of the benefits is Windows Azure Access. So there's a monthly access that you get, and as you can see, here, Visual Studio Professional gets $70 US So does Test Professional, MSDN Platforms, and Premium get $130, and Visual Studio Ultimate gets $200 worth of Windows Azure per month. So that allows you to run VMs or websites or SQL databases. You just have to keep track of the usage. But the cool thing is that, for you to activate this benefit, you don't need to provide a credit card or anything. It's just associated with your MSDN subscription. So once you reach that limit, it's just going to stop your services anyway. There's quite a lot of people at our partners and customers that use their individual MSDN subscriptions to play around with Azure, learn a bit, do a bit of development, and then once they have the solution, that gets integrated into a production subscription that the company have bought as part of enterprise agreement or just pay-as-you-go solution. So that's all I wanted to cover for now. I know I went through this pretty quickly, but just to cover a few things. So what is, the cloud, the three types of clouds that we provide, some of the services, a few of the things that you can do from inside Visual Studio, and different types of ways to host things on websites, and then the benefits that you get if you have an MSDN subscription. And then if you have any follow-up questions, then just contact myself or Joe, and we can follow up with you from there. Okay, thank you.